Hello, class, and welcome to our presentation, Introduction to Philosophy. So in this presentation, we are going to address the question, what is philosophy? We're going to talk about philosophy as the art of reasoning and argumentation, and then we're going to end with a conclusion. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I think of a philosopher, I tend to think of a man with a beard and a toga. And I also tend to think of, medieval philosopher theologians, like Thomas Aquinas here. And I also tend to think of, well, white men with beards wearing some kind of period clothing. That is, if you study the history of philosophy, what you're going to find is that the vast majority of philosophers were white, predominantly European men. And in our multicultural society today in higher education, there is a critique out there that these men of these particular historical periods really have nothing to donate to our society today, that their ideas are outdated and biased. So one question that we will consider throughout the course is the following. Are the philosophical theories of dead, predominantly European white men, still valuable in our multicultural society today? So we will talk about this a bit more later, but first, let's talk about, what philosophy is. So the term philosophy in Greek literally means love of wisdom. That is, the Greek term philos means love or friendship, and sophos means wisdom. So a philosopher is someone who is in love with wisdom, or is friends with wisdom and dedicates their life to the pursuit of wisdom. Now, what is wisdom? Well, that's something that maybe we can talk about later. So a formal definition of philosophy is the following. It is an academic discipline dedicated to the critical analysis of major questions regarding the nature of the world and human life. Put simply, philosophy is a discipline dedicated to addressing big questions. Does God exist? Do we have free will? What is the meaning of life? And philosophy is often referred to as the art of reasoning and argumentation. Now, what do we mean by this? That is, what do we mean by reasoning and what do we mean by argumentation? So what is reasoning? Well, reasoning refers to the mental activity of developing ideas and formulating valid reasons or evidence to support such ideas in a critical manner. That is, in the Western philosophical tradition, philosophers believe that the capability of reasoning is something which is a uniquely human trait, that we as human beings have the ability to brainstorm ideas and then to justify those ideas with evidence or reasons. So we know what reasoning is, so what is argumentation? Well, argumentation means to organize reasons or evidence in such a way that makes an idea clear and convincing. So not only do we as human beings have the ability to reason, right, to formulate ideas and reasons for those ideas, but we also have the ability to organize them in a way and to try to convince each other of their truth value. And one way of trying to convince someone of your argument is to use logic. So in order to construct a convincing argument, philosophers will often use rules of argumentation referred to as logic. And logic basically means formal rules of proper reasoning and argumentation. So these are basically the tools of philosophy: reasoning, argumentation, and logic. So let's put the equation together. So by reasoning and creating arguments through the use of logic, philosophers can provide insight into the major questions regarding the world and human life. So for example, if a person believes that capital punishment is morally wrong, according to the discipline of philosophy, he or she must, 1, reason ideas as to why capital punishment is morally wrong. They can't just say that they believe capital punishment is wrong because they just think it is or they feel it is. They actually have to develop reasons or ideas. Secondly, they have to generate evidence to support those ideas. Again, they can't just say, that's just my opinion. They have to justify it. And one is encouraged to use logic to organize their evidence into a convincing argument. And why do we have to go through all this trouble? Because the rule of philosophy is that the more convincing an argument is, the greater truth value it has. So what makes an argument convincing? Strong supporting evidence, that the evidence is well organized and follows a clear logical structure. So if someone's argument follows this kind of structure or satisfies these kind of elements, then the more convincing it is, and the more convincing it is, then the truer it is. Now, on the one hand, using the tools of philosophy helps us to construct arguments, but on the other hand, they can also aid us in tearing them down. For as the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "What I understand by philosopher, a terrible explosive in the presence of which everything is in danger." That is, if there is a philosopher in the room, then watch out, because all arguments are open to scrutiny and critical analysis and questioning. And if you're not careful, and if you don't justify your arguments clearly enough and convincingly enough, then a philosopher is liable to tear them apart or explode them. So in this presentation, we learned about, one, what the term philosophy means, and we learned about the tools of argumentation that philosophers use to provide insight into the world and human life. But what exactly do philosophers talk about? What issues are they interested in? Well, this is something that we will learn about in the next presentation.